Welcome to Across the Opti-Verse. We didn't find podcasts with enough tech and innovation insights,
so we created our own.
Today's episode will be covering the financial industry in South Africa, in particular, the frontier of technology and innovation.
And as you'll notice, we've got a guest here, our guest host. Audrey and I are not going to be hosting this episode. We've actually got Kate Kleinhout to take over from us.
Hi everyone, my name is Kate Kleinhout and I am a business development consultant at Opti-Num Solutions. And today I'm going to be talking to two of my colleagues, Leo Breert and Jacqueline Atsango, about what they do in the finance space.
If you'd like to jump to certain parts of the episode, to meet the voices behind the expertise, you can jump to 1 minute and 10 seconds. To discover the fascinating transition from engineering for Jackie and Leo, you can jump to 4 minutes. To delve into the challenges facing the finance industry as it undergoes the digital transformation, you can jump to 8 minutes and 45 seconds. To understand how we can uncover the intricacies of properly governing data and models in the finance sector, you can jump to 21 minutes and 30 seconds. And as we wrap up the episode with key insights in the journey for successful digital transformation, you can jump to 33 minutes and 5 seconds. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Before we dive into the conversation, allow me to introduce myself and how I became the host of this podcast for today. I graduated from the University of Pretoria with my bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and joined Opti-Num just under a year ago as a business development consultant. I previously ventured into the processing and manufacturing industry and have since pivoted to the finance and telecommunications space at Opti-Num, working with a range of clients from commercial and central banks to asset management, telecommunications, and as well as traders. Since working at Opti-Num, I've had the honor of working closely with today's guests and learned a great deal from them both. So allow me to introduce them. First up, we've got Jacqueline Atsango. She is an electrical engineer from the University of Wits and is a senior consultant and team lead at Opti-Num with extensive experience in reporting and automation and our resident Power BI expert. Jackie is also my go-to foodie, especially for vegetarian recipes and restaurant recommendations. And she's also quite an inspiration when it comes to finding a balance between work life and life outside of work, whether that's encouraging me to find hobbies such as yoga or being out in nature more often. And she really is an inspiration to myself. And I know the rest of her team also regards it with this kind of admiration. We are also joined today by Leo Breert, who has a degree in aeronautical engineering from Wits. Leo is a senior consultant working with our large banking clients in the model risk management space, as well as asset management firms within Southern Africa. Leo and I have been working closely together for the duration of my time at Opti-Num, and I've become quite fond of his willingness to break the ice and make everyone in the room feel far more at ease. I also refer to him as the chief idea generator because he's always got wonderfully different ways of thinking about a challenge and how we could be innovative in doing something different from the norm. And if you've ever been fortunate enough to join myself and Leo in a meeting, you're probably guaranteed to have callers coming up with the same plan or have an identical response at the exact same time. So I feel most fortunate to work closely with someone of his caliber, and on top of that, someone with a quick and witty sense of humor. So from my time at Opti-Num, I've come to learn that the Opti-Num has a breadth of experience in the finance space, but also a depth of technical expertise when it comes to certain technologies in that space. But also over that time, I've learned that the world of finance is large, and there's a lot of subcategories and different roles and tasks within finance that we could really dive into. So, Jackie, I wanted to start with you and some of the spaces you worked in. But before we jump into that, can you tell me how you found yourself working in the finance sector, coming from an engineering background?
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a puzzle, but I would say a fluke. It's interesting when I think back to being at Wits Engineering, a lot of our lecturers said, you know, stick with engineering, don't go into finance, and yet here we are. But what's interesting, I think, is there's a lot of possibilities, problem-solving opportunities within the finance space. And that's always an interesting challenge for engineers, and not just electrical engineering background where you do get exposed to working with software and things like that, but there's a lot of systems, processes, so, a breadth of possibilities and opportunities within the finance space for engineers. For me, myself, as I said, it kind of ended up being that way, but I've found some very interesting challenges, especially with looking at customers and also delving into the software challenges within the finance space. So I've learned a lot, and yeah, I'm still learning a lot and enjoying that.
Yeah, I don't think it ever ends, honestly. Yeah. That's how I feel. As you mentioned, like, we all come from an engineering background, right? But I think we really bring a different outlook on the finance space. But then, as you said, so many engineers actually do go into the finance space, so it's quite interesting. Leo, what about yourself? How did you get into finance from engineering, aeronautical engineering?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, Kate. I think very similar answer to Jackie, but in my case, I joined a graduate program here at Opti-Num, and I was given the opportunity to explore a couple of different areas, and finance was one of them. And I thought, let me try it out. We have quite a few friends and family who are also engineers that don't work in engineering anymore and have also pivoted into other areas like finance, and thought, well, they can do it, I can potentially do it. So let me give it a try. And 4 years later, this is where I am. I work in finance as an engineer, and get asked that question quite often. And I enjoy it. It's like Jackie said, there's some cool problems to solve. The maths is pretty much the same, just in a different application area. And yeah, I find myself here doing cool, fun things with technology and systems and processes and problem solving and building solutions for customers, which is really, really cool. And that's where kind of the passion for engineering comes through. So
just from us working together and getting to know each other, you seem to have quite a knack outside of work for finance as well. Like, you're always telling me about the new tech that's out there, like introducing me to different platforms. So it seems like it's something that you're interested in beyond your work.
Yeah, it is, because when you're coming out of university and you start earning a salary and trying to figure out what you do with this money, you're always looking for how can you grow it. So I got into the investment side and trying to figure out how do I invest my money, things like that, into all kinds of things, which now I see in my work. How do they work? Like, how are people calculating the different weights of the asset classes for your investments? And it's really cool to kind of see that, the kind of mathematics behind it and the optimization techniques that you see in engineering that you're now using in finance to figure these things out, and how to get reward for your money that you invested for hopefully the lowest amount of risk. But yeah, you can always invest in risky stocks and maybe you get a higher reward, and you can thumb suck and do things. But when you start using numbers, it becomes a lot more clear what to do. So there's that whole side of me outside of work that's interesting too.
But like, it definitely comes through in your work, because even when clients contact us and ask us, I've run into this problem, you've already said, oh, I've tried this out, why don't you try and use this approach to trying to solve that problem? So it definitely comes through in your work. Okay. Thank you. Jackie, what would you say are some of the common challenges you've seen working in the finance industry? Because we work with different people in different companies looking at different problems. So do you think there's a bit of a trend or some challenges that are faced by many in the industry?
Yeah, definitely. I think on a high level, most of the organizations are wanting to be innovative with the products that they're offering their customers. And there's a lot of insight that you need to gather in order to make the right strategic decisions around that. That also relates to then understanding your customers and their behavior and how that changes, whether it's seasonally or anomalous. So those kind of broad trends, I think, is generally what you're trying to solve for in this space. But from a challenge perspective, if you don't have the right kind of data, to support the information that you're trying to look for, the predictions you're trying to make, the behavior you're trying to understand, then there's a lot to work through to get the different organizations to that place. So I think broadly, it's something I've seen, within the finance space, and also not necessarily in finance, but when you're looking at customers and trying to be innovative with products and that adapting to the market, that's typically what we're trying to solve for.
Maybe on top of that, I think, some of the clients we work with, they're so big and their organizations have been around for so long. Sometimes there's really that inertia to get change going. But I mean, like some of the clients, after talking about your history with them, you've been working with them for almost 2 to 4 years, and it's been a bit of a struggle. But now that you have some momentum going, there's actually some implementation, automation that's coming through in that. So that's quite interesting.
But that's the same reason why, or for one of the reasons why they have people like the head of digital transformation. Right? Someone needs to spearhead this change that you're talking about with new technology platforms that are coming out all the time. Now that we've got the cloud, how do we move things from on-premises to the cloud, and somebody that can tackle these challenges, pull everyone along with them, because there's going to be people that are stuck in their ways of using old technology that maybe solve the problem, but maybe don't do it in the most efficient way. So just something to add on onto that.
Yeah, and further with that as well, as you said, the institutions have been there for a long time, relying on prior technology. You also find a lot of legacy systems or methodologies that you have to navigate. So yes, you have the subjective, with innovating and product, but the underlying technology needs to also rise to the occasion, come to the level that we need it to be at. And if you don't have the right support, the buy-in within the organization to do that, then it's going to be a really slow process. You find a lot of inefficiencies, and a big part of solving that problem is also understanding what challenges the different teams are facing in that regard, so that they can become more digital with the technology that they're using and have more access to the information they need.
Being in silos as well becomes a big challenge or a blocker to this whole digital transformation process, and integration with old technology with new. Sometimes the old technology does the exact job it needs to. Nobody wants to change it because it is the best solution. How do you start integrating that with technology that's created now, 30 years later, for instance? And that also becomes a challenge. So there's quite a lot of innovation happening in this space.
And it's kind of also what I've been seeing is, some groups within an organization are really pushing for that innovation. They really want to have the newest technology, be on the forefront of doing new things. But then there's other groups who aren't really willing to, dig up everything that they've done in the last 30 years to change that. And it's almost difficult for half the organization to move forward and half to stay where it is. They have to go all together. And then, so we've discussed how there's different teams in silos. How would you say you collaborate with these teams in the finance space and the other stakeholders within the organization to ensure that your solutions are meeting their needs and aligning with the strategic objectives? So maybe Jackie, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I think some of the things we've already mentioned are key as part of that process. But what comes to mind first for me is understanding their vision, obviously. What is the vision? Where do they want to get to? And then what data do they have? Because I think that plays a big role in the strategies that come afterwards. So if you don't have this kind of information, this kind of data, part of the plan could be to find it, source it, and bring it into the pipeline. But there's also certain maturity that the teams might need to get to meet some of their objectives. So I think it's understanding where do you want to get to and what do you have available, and how can we work with that, maybe build a roadmap to get you there, even if it's that amazing model you're going to build or you would like to build cannot be the first step. Actually, we need these inputs and these conversations with these other guys in these departments so that we can get there.
Start at the base level. Like you just mentioned, Jackie, you can't go and build these new amazing models if your data is not right. Where you're sourcing that data from, and your data teams are often sitting in their own siloed environment, and we can't always understand where all the data sources coming from. What do these things mean? That probably segues to a whole different data conversation and management process, but got to start from that baseline level. Otherwise, you can't be building these amazing new AI models if you don't have the basics right.
So that maybe that's a great segue. We know that businesses have so much data these days, but sometimes it's not the data they need. It's not good quality data for what they're trying to achieve. What are some of the things that should be implemented at base level? Is that a good governance platform? Is that a framework of, how does it move from one point of the company all the way through the life cycle to the other? What are some things that should be considered when implementing a solid foundation for data and models and processes?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. You're looking at me.
I'm sorry, Leo, please.
That's a really good question. I think on the data side, you really need to have strong teams or data engineering teams that understand what they are logging throughout the business. Right? So, and it depends on company to company. But if we're talking finance, let's talk credit or credit lenders. You've got people that are applying for loans every hour of every day, all the time. So you're logging vast amounts of data. But are you capturing the right things? How is that data being stored? With the cloud now, we can store the data in a lot of different places, but something you got to take one of the projects we're working on now, trying to figure out is things like data sovereignty. It becomes quite important. So where are you storing that data and what are you storing? We also have POPIA in South Africa and you've probably got different frameworks around Europe and America and the rest of the world as well, but you need to understand the personal protection of this data, of what are you storing and who has access to that data too, and that then leads, of course, into the data sovereignty. But then that data, let's assume all of those problems are solved and we've collected really good, solid data on people. We need to then start building models for that data, but we need to be able to give people access to it, and that doesn't always happen as smoothly as what you might think, because you maybe want to build a credit scorecard model, but you only know of a database that has application data in it. If you're looking to add something on there, maybe you want to add some economic indicators onto that. Where do you pull that from? And that becomes a whole kind of data pipeline problem of trying to source and process your data into a way that becomes meaningful and usable, so that your data scientists or your analysts or whoever needs to use the data can tell stories with it and make sense of it, and use it in a way that's going to be put into a model that can make business decisions. So there's a lot of different mechanics that form part of that. It's the data ingestion, where is it stored, and how is it going to be used, and is it used maybe ethically as well? And that then kind of loops back to, are we storing the right kind of data that we're allowed to store, and are we using the right data to make business decisions for people? Because at the end of the day, we're still working with people, and we can't be using data that it might be biased or features that are unethical to use that we shouldn't be. So a lot of different considerations.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that as well is and it goes back to your question about the challenges. When you have that kind of oversight, you're also reducing some key man dependencies, because some people, as you say, might be using data that is not maybe sound. And maybe that's not the case. It might be sound, but there's key man dependencies or certain data wrangling or methodologies that end up in a silo if you don't have some kind of governance or oversight of that information. Then that gets lost within the organization.
Yeah, and you have to come back to the governance points on the data. There's the piece of the governance, like up here, make sure you inherit you abide by all of those rules. But once you start kind of putting data together, you need to make sure that you're putting the right things together. And there's a lot of tools and technologies that can help with that. So you can create data flows to see, well, where's the source data coming from, and how are this data sets stitched together to make something meaningful from it. But somebody needs to watch that. You need to have some sort of validation process to ensure that we're pulling the right data for the right application, and we're putting it into a model that's actually going to potentially have business value.
Yeah.
So there is that like governance lens that sits over that.
Would you say the governance of data and models is taking shape and there are technologies that are really trying to change this? Or do you think this is still a challenge that has a lot to work through before it really gets to a solid or good place? Jackie, please.
Yeah, well, I'm happy for Leo to go ahead. I think that's...
Okay, we'll just keep passing the hot potato around here. But it's fine, I'll take this one. This is something, and you asked it for a reason, Kate. We work on this every day now, right? There's a big thing around model risk management that's happening in the US and the Bank of England and Europe, and hopefully coming to South Africa, where there's now regulations around managing the risk of your models. And so let me think where I'm going with this flow, right? It is a big question. At the moment, there is a lot of platforms that are out there to help with specific pieces of managing and governing the risk related to the whole model life cycle. And when we talk about a model life cycle, we're talking about everything, including where does the data come from, right? To developing a model, to validating that model. Specifically in finance, validation of models is very important, especially in the credit risk space, to testing that model, deploying that model, and monitoring it. So there's a lot of technologies and platforms that can cover pieces of that, as well as maybe even complete workflows. So the space is developing very, very quickly. But a point on that is people have been developing models for many, many years, doing mathematical computations and having informed business decisions has happened for a long time. But what's happening now is that the models are becoming more and more sophisticated. We're moving away from, we all learned y equals mx plus c at university, but at school, right? But that's in itself, it's a model. And if we really pull it down to that level, that's a very basic model. But now with the developments of things like machine learning and deep learning and this whole AI realm, we need to be able to manage how those models are making business decisions. So with the Fed, there's regulations around managing model risk. With the Bank of England's SS 123, they are giving regulations around how do we manage model risk. Credit risk, kind of management of those models has been around for even longer than that. In that you need to have certain models that need to be validated that need to go through some sort of checks and audits by the central banks. Um, but the space is developing very fast because with the regulations means that all the banks or certain banks, according to the regulations for now, need to adhere to specific guidelines. And if the technology doesn't have that yet, they either need to add it or new players start popping up in the market to be able to address the challenges that the banks and financial institutions need to solve. Things like, they need a report on their model risk. So how do they do that? What do they report on? Do they report on all their models? And that's where the question sometimes comes up is, well, what is a model? Part of the SS 123 regulations is you need to clarify or you need to define what does your model look like at your financial institution. We always talk about it at Opti-Num. Everything is a model. So if you've got an input and you've got an output and some sort of transformation happens, we classify that as a model. But maybe a bank doesn't need to do that. So the regulations are there, but there's some playroom within that about how you can give those definitions. So I hope I answered your question in a quite a long way, Kate.
No, it was a big question. A long answer makes sense. But it's kind of like, at this point in time, there aren't really those kind of regulations in South Africa.
No.
So now it's like, how do you find a framework that works for your company or your financial institutions with the idea that this regulations probably will make its way to South Africa, right?
Yeah.
We expect it's going to happen sooner or later. So how can you set it up now so that when that comes, you're not caught on your back foot and you already implemented something that's going to work for the regulations coming in, right?
And that's a great question, Kate. And I think we talk about it all the time when we're interacting with our current customers. But I think our view is the same. Why wait for regulations when you should be implementing best practices already?
Exactly.
As I spoke about earlier, like the models are becoming more and more complex. And everyone sometimes refers to these machine learning models and deep learning models as black box models because they're not 100% sure how they're working. With all the technology that's out now, it's as easy as saying, here's a function, train it, and I've got a trained model, and it can make predictions. I haven't actually coded that up or built it from scratch. So let me get back to the thought where we were at. One of you guys need to help me.
We were talking about regulations on in South Africa just yet,
yes,
so they're coming.
Best practices. Companies that are using these more and more advanced models to make informed business decisions, I think need to adopt best practices from the get-go. Because you do not want a model making the incorrect prediction, because that could potentially negatively affect your company, and it can negatively affect your bottom line, right?
And your reputation.
And your reputation. So that's the reason why regulation starts, is because something bad happened before. So the governing bodies have to come in and step in and say, you need to do it like this to mitigate that risk. So the regulations that we talk about from the Fed and the Bank of England and all of these places, they're not necessarily here for other models outside of credit risk models yet. But companies that we're working with at the moment are on their journey to protect themselves from the risk that can rise up from these models. I think before we started this, we were talking about these similar questions, right? And we spoke about, well, let's get a step out of finance. Let's look at a telco. If a telco has customers that are, they've got customers, right? And they maybe have a churn model that's going to predict when is a customer going to drop the contract or whatever that may be. You want to build a model to mitigate how many customers are dropping off. So maybe it's a model to predict the churn. You don't want that to go wrong, because if you're predicting, oh no, we don't actually have to watch the segment of customers because our model says it's fine, but all of a sudden they're dropping off, that's a risk, because you're going to negatively affect the bottom line of your company. So you need to have best practices in knowing, firstly, the data that was used to train these models. You also need to know if we're training the model on a certain population of data, we need to version that so that we know that this version was valid for this time period. But we also need to get the model into production in a relatively short period of time. You don't want a model that was trained, let's say this year in January, and it's only making itself into production now, because over the last 3 months, a lot of things could change with that underlying data. So there's a lot of that as well, and I really think it just comes down to what's best practice. Right? And everyone has frameworks for how they can define this. People have been implementing model risk management solutions before the regulations came out, because they know what the adverse effects could have. And the ones that didn't, something went wrong, regulations come out, so now everybody has to do it. So
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
But I think broadly there is that with the clients that we're supporting, we do see this need. So it's not yet here, it's coming, but actually from a best practices perspective, this is the way that we should be going forward. And then back to the challenges, you reducing those silos, people have more access and visibility of how the organization is making those critical decisions.
That's a big one for me, is really bringing all those groups working in silos together and making it more efficient, because it's like, how can a company really be operating when everyone is doing something very independent? But I think it's really exciting being a part of these conversations, you know, listening to how these big institutions are set up and how we're actually discussing a way forward with them, as you said, setting out a roadmap of how do you achieve this.
And the way that, to come back to this kind of conversation outside of just finance, it's one of the reasons why machine learning operations has come about, is because people see that there is a need to manage their models, and they need to understand the risks that are involved, and if they're not using the right version, or the models are trained on good data and good, maybe need to go for an English test there, bad data. We need to, if they're trained on bad data, they need to know the version. And this MLOps kind of whole space is developed from DevOps. Where DevOps was traditionally a software engineering focused workflow to ensure that critical, or not even just critical, all the people, every part of the software is critical. But like pieces of software that go into production and make that integrate with bigger systems, that they are working as intended. And MLOps is derived from that, to use those kind of principles, but when you're developing machine learning models. And you see a lot of software engineers transition to that machine learning engineer space, and data scientist space, where they're building models all the time, and they've inherited those DevOps good practices of pushing these things to production. And you can always then easily either roll back, you could inform people, where does this come from, what is the lineage, the data, the model, how was it trained, what are things like the hyperparameters that you've updated, and you've got stores for that. So you can definitely see where these best practices are coming, because people see the need for that. And like some of the customers we're talking to, they've got over 500 to 600 models that are running critical business applications. And if you're not using those processes correctly, you can see if something goes wrong and there's dependencies around that model. It's not just the one model that's going to cause a problem. It's everything that's linked to it. And if you think about the data piece again, that data on a first level model that feeds into 100 other models, potentially, you could see that big problems can occur.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a lot to think about. So in wrapping up, I just want to ask you to just some insights about what you've learned over the last couple of years. So what advice would you give to financial professionals who are looking to leverage technology and maybe improve their reporting and analytics capabilities?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the support that we've been providing with some of our customers. And the main point of advice is just understanding if their data is sound, the quality of that, because that makes it then easier for us to trust the results that come out, and their teams to have trust in that and the decisions that they need to make. There's a lot of insights that they can focus on from an automation perspective. And I think we're seeing this broadly. There's also shifting into the dashboarding tools, having that information accessible and shareable. And it's a way, I think some teams might not be as sure about the tools and capabilities out there that they can leverage in order to make some of their monthly processes efficient, and then focus on the insights and the analytics, and thereafter the decisions that come out of automating that process. So, something that takes 2 to 3 weeks to produce doesn't have to be that way. And the teams can also evolve in what they're offering in terms of the organization. So I think identifying those spaces within their departments is something I would recommend.
Yeah.
Let me add on to that, sorry, Kate. What's also coming about now and in this whole spaces that we're talking about is low-code, no-code solutions, where it's accelerating that time to develop something meaningful that can be used within finance, telcos, every single company, and it's not making it restricted for finance people to be software engineers. They can build these solutions themselves and get them into production for automating daily tasks, or whether those tasks are for the organization wide or it's just your own task that you need automated to make yourself more efficient. It's very, very accessible at the moment.
I think it was very interesting when we started working together, seeing some of the work that you cut down from people doing for weeks, a monthly operation that they had to do, which was very redundant most of the time. It was manual, and you come in there and you really solve the problem of like, okay, this can be run in a day, and then it's sorted, and then they have all that time to, as you say, provide insight into what that data actually means. So
and that's things get really exciting once you sort of lift from that level and you start looking at modeling and going back to innovating with products. You have more space for that kind of work.
And I can imagine if you've been doing that for 5 to 10 years, you wouldn't think there's another way, right? Until someone comes to you and says, I could automate this for you. Like, this is not that hard, actually. So,
one of our customers we went into, they were running reports manually every single month. And it's like, okay, but the report is there. Let's find a way to automate this. And then it frees up people's time to focus on other projects. But I think something that's also important there to think about is people are quite stuck in their ways often. We also said at the beginning of this chat about how these massive organizations have a lot of legacy that comes through, and because they know that's the way it's done, this is the way it should always be done. But it's nice when you get an outsider. Hopefully it's nice when you get an outsider that comes and says, but why, we can make this better for you, and we can help you improve it with all this new technology, all these new platforms.
Guys, this was a really wonderful conversation. Thank you. I feel like we just scratched the surface of finance, to be honest. So hopefully I'll chat to you guys again. But thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you guys again.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Till next time.